If you've ever felt like the world wasn't made for you, you might be right. And that doesn't mean who you are is wrong. In today's episode, my amazing guest is Nhu Nguyen. We talk about how to find belonging when we don't seem to fit in anywhere, better understanding the automatic coping mechanisms that sometimes seem to ruin our lives instead of making it better, and how to start supporting yourself even when self-love doesn't feel possible every day. Nhu is also the mastermind artist behind the Unforgetting logo, so make sure you listen till the end of the episode where we talk about the creative backstory and inspiration for the design. Before we start for today, there's a content warning for this episode because we talk about some pretty difficult things this week. Although not discussed in depth, we do mention things like suicidal ideation, self-harm, sexual assault, and substance abuse. If that means that this isn't the right episode for you, please take care of yourself and meet up with us next week instead.
Let's talk about making peace with the path that we're on, with the life that we've been given. We often hear this idea that what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And so if something really bad happens to you, just make the best of it. It was meant to happen to you. What do you think about that idea, and also how to make peace with our life path?
There is some truth to it, but what people don't really talk about is how to take care of yourself during that as well. And my life path was by no means easy, and I don't think anyone's is really, but you know, there is, especially in Asian culture, there's this notion of, you just gotta push through it, like, get over it. And like you said, whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger, yada yada. But no one really talks about the dark side of that. And no one really talks about how you may lose yourself in that process. And that's something that I kind of had to grapple with, and I'm still actually grappling with today, is really understanding who I am as a person. And while I've gone through this path in life that I've subsequently forged my own way, it wasn't initially, it wasn't with intention, or I didn't do it with that purpose in mind. It was mainly just out of survival.
I love that you mentioned trauma there too, because there's, alongside these ideas of what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, we hear like, well, my trauma made me a better person. And what you just said, like, there's this stage of almost feeling lost when we've been dealt certain things, and really having to redefine ourselves and not being the same person we were before our trauma. And that is so real. And I just want to, right out of the gate on the show, just state emphatically that you didn't need your trauma to be a good person. And there's a difference between making the best and taking care of yourself after something terrible happens to you. But if you have experienced trauma, that just shouldn't have happened. It absolutely shouldn't have happened. And it was unfair. And it's amazing if on the other side of that was you are moving through survival, if at some point you're able to make some good story for yourself out of it, or find some like flowers in that like mud garden, that's amazing. But it's not required. You can just fucking hate what happens to you because it shouldn't have happened.
Yeah, and I think something that I've realized pretty recently is, if you're moving through your trauma after trauma as a means of survival, you're just gonna go to the next point of trauma in your life, because you're not really addressing it. You're not really, or I wasn't really looking inward into myself and realizing what I needed to sustain myself holistically, not just to get to the next day or to just wake up and do the damn thing. My mistake through this was not my mistake, my lesson, my learning out of all of this in my journey is being ambitious and like pushing through. While it's great in some ways, it can easily be a way to mask everything and hide everything and just leave all this trauma unaddressed and pretend or feel that, yeah, the trauma made me stronger, like I'm better for it, but I wasn't really helping myself in that regard. So when there are moments where I'm not moving so fast and I'm not going on to the next thing, and I really have to sit with myself, I have no idea who the fuck I am. And I have no idea what I need for myself. And then those are moments where sometimes even the smallest thing could be a catalyst or a trigger that would unawaken something out of nowhere, and I'm like, why am I a mess? Or why am I having a panic attack? There's a lot of darkness and a lot of undertones to going on this path that just isn't talked about enough.
Yeah, I'm so grateful that you are here talking about it with me today. And what you said is so important to highlight again, that if you don't know what to do or you don't know how to get beyond just having survived something, it's not a deficit in your character or even your capacity or your intelligence. Like trauma, one definition of trauma is too much, too fast, too soon, without your consent. And so the you is just taken out of that. Your preference, your consent, everything that, like, your agency is removed. And so it makes so much sense in looking back at what happened to also feel that sense of, how could I figure out what to do with this when I wasn't involved in it happening?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I think, at least for me, my reaction to all the events that happened to me was because, like you said, it came at me so fast, so furiously. That's how I responded as well, outwardly, in, I want to say, addressing it, but I wasn't even really addressing it. I was just trying to do the next thing in my life to make life work for me.
Yeah, to be able to get to the next thing in life at all. So, Nhu, I would love to open the floor to hear more about your story and what you feel comfortable sharing today in this moment. And before we got on this call, or before we started recording, I reminded Nhu that even if sometimes we have something we're usually comfortable talking about, that doesn't mean that we don't also deserve consent in the moment. And so, in asking Nhu to share, and I'm saying this to you listeners as a loving reminder, that you don't owe anyone the details of your trauma, even if you've talked about it with them before, or even if you're normally comfortable talking about it. But disclaimer aside, Nhu, what would you like to share about you, about who you are, about your story, about why you are where you are today?
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that reiteration. So I was born in Vietnam to a really loving mom and grandparents. My dad, who my mom is still married to, was in the US at the time, so he wasn't there when I was born. But what happened was I was born with bilateral cleft lip palate to a family that was very poor, very impoverished, very isolated from the community. And in Asian culture, when anything is wrong, or anything is less than perfect, you're just seen as lesser than.
Nhu, can I interject here and just ask, what is a bilateral cleft palate? What does that mean?
Yeah, great question. So I'm not a medical professional, so I'll try to explain this the best way I can. But it's basically when your palate is open. There's nothing there. And some people have just one side, one lateral cleft lip or cleft palate. I still happen to have bilateral cleft lip and cleft palate. And what that means is that there's a space. For the viewers that are watching this video, you can see my hands, but right here under my nostrils were just spaces. I didn't have an upper lip really. Behind my, like, the roof of my mouth, essentially, I didn't really have one. I had an open space, like a valley, if you want to call it that. Yeah, so because of that, it was really hard for me to get any nutrients, breathe, and I also have, as a symptom of that, severe hearing loss. So I wear hearing aids. And of course, I had a really severe speech impediment. Through a lot of speech therapy, it's gotten a lot better, but sometimes it still comes out. Yeah, so lot of shit against me right out the womb. And because my mom was, her husband wasn't there, and she saw me and she felt so, I don't want to put words in her mouth, but I would imagine that she felt really disappointed and scared and just didn't know what to do, especially not having any money. And I learned this later in life, but I found out that there were a few family members that encouraged her to just abandon me and just leave me somewhere because they didn't have the means to take care of me, or there's just no way to provide me the life that I needed to just be fulfilled. But I have my grandfather to thank, who stepped in, and my aunt, my dad's sister, who stepped in and were like, what the fuck? No, she's a human. This is your daughter. And I always hear stories about how this happened, but my grandmother and my grandfather, they just stuck with me and held me while my mom, I can't even imagine the postpartum she was going through. She just couldn't even bear to be with me. So I had a lot of distance between myself and my mom, and also obviously between myself and my dad, who was overseas. But my grandfather, he would just go to the nearest clinic or hospital and try to find the help that I needed. And he would sleep on the floor of trains and just the ground, just waiting for someone to help me. So I have a lot to thank due to my grandfather, who just went through hell and back just to make sure that I had a chance. Eventually, I was able to be seen by someone who was able to sew me up, patch me up, and my mom and I eventually made our way over to the States to my dad. But, of course, me looking the way that I looked and having the deficiencies that I had with my hearing and my speech, it was not easy. They didn't even realize I had hearing loss yet at that point. I'm now meeting my dad for the first time. People are talking to me. I'm just like mute because I have no idea what they're saying. I can't hear them. And so that contributed to a lot of, not only is she a freak, but she like is mute and she like doesn't listen to us and whatever. Eventually they realized I was like hard of hearing and they're like, oh shit, we gotta get her some hearing aids. But because of that, I was already off on the wrong foot with my dad. Like, I was his daughter, sure, but he was just like completely detached from me. My mom and my dad and I were living in a townhome that we couldn't really afford. So my dad was working 2 jobs, like day shift, night shift. My mom would stay at home, but she didn't know a lot of English. So there's a lot of resentment, I think, that was built up and unfortunately was projected onto me. And eventually my little sister was born and she came out perfect, chubby little asshole, but I love her. um, but, she came out super plump, super round, and no defects, born in America. She was surrounded by a community already of people that love her. So already there's this complete difference in us, and a lot of that love and adoration was sort of shined on her. So I say all this because I not only had to deal with my birth defects, but I'm navigating how to talk to my family, how to be raised as an perfect Asian child, but also navigating how to grow up in an American society where I don't necessarily fit in. I'm not white. I have these defects. I had a speech impediment. So there's a lot just right out the gate to try and figure out in my identity. And I did all I could to find my place. But it was tough because I'm technically disabled, but I'm not disabled enough to be classified with disabled people. I'm technically deaf, but I'm not deaf enough to be classified with the deaf community. I basically grew up in the US, but I'm not really American enough. I speak Vietnamese at home, but I'm not Vietnamese, I'm not Asian enough. So there's just a lot of not enough, like just from childhood and throughout. So I didn't really know what to do, and I didn't really know how to articulate myself because no one was listening to me. And even when I could talk, people didn't understand me. I turned to art as my vice at the time. I drew and drew obsessively, and eventually it was getting some attention. And something clicked in my head. I'm like, oh, this is what I need to do to get validation and value out of my life. So I was obsessively going on to one thing after another, like what medium can I do next? And while that was great and I was able to really learn and pick up a lot of skills, like we were talking earlier, I was really just masking a lot of the trauma and the stuff that I wasn't able to address. And I mean, at a young age, you can't really ask for a kid to really be emotionally intelligent and understand what's going on. But yeah, I didn't know how else to voice myself, anything that was going on at home. When my dad was, he's coming home late at work, like after 18-hour shifts, and of course he's tired, and he sees me and he's angry, and he's like, why the F am I like working all these hours and you're just here bothering me? And my mom's depressed. After my sister was born, she had severe postpartum depression. And so, it was a lot to try and bottle up. So I had to do something about it and I turned to art. But yeah, it was tough. There would be days where I will go to a movie theater and I'll look at the movie posters that would be like coming spring 2002, I don't know. And I'll tell myself, be like, oh, I wonder if I'll be around. Just because I've accepted the fact that like I'm not worth enough to live a long life, so I'm not going to be around for a long time. I don't think that way anymore. Well, I still have some dark days, but I don't think like that as much. Eventually, I was able to find my voice verbally, and I was able to stand up for myself a little bit more, and I became a little bit more acclimated to my surroundings and sort of realized I had to make my own path in order for this to work for me and not try to fit into something that was already defined. But in doing so, like we were talking about, I was very fast and furious, and I did everything with so much assertion that I wasn't thinking. Led me down a lot of roads that I probably should have gone down. You know, I had my bout with substance abuse for a little bit. I went down a road of not respecting my body and kind of I masked it as self-confidence, but I wasn't loving myself, and I was letting myself be used, and that led me down a road to sexual assault and rape on multiple occasions, but I didn't realize it was rape until I finally, the light bulb went up on my head and I was like, oh no, that wasn't, I said no. So there's a lot of different instances where it was very volatile. And even though I'm grateful for them happening because I've learned stuff out of it, it probably could have been avoided if someone just grabbed my shoulders and was like, chill. You don't need to do anything to improve yourself. You don't need to earn any of that validation.
We started this conversation talking about our life path, and I'm so grateful to you for sharing a little snapshot of what your path has been so far. What's interesting is like you were failed by the system, right? And especially as children, when things like this happen, children never think this system is wrong. It's I am wrong. And most people do need to create their path in some way, but a lot of people fit into the ruts that are already created. And it sounds like you didn't fit into any of those ruts. And so you truly had to create your own path, but needed to create your own path in a system that was not set up to support you whatsoever.
Yeah. And this brings me to a point that is a prime example of this. I remember in middle school, I used to self-harm. I used to cut. And at that time, thankfully, I had some really good friends, and they saw what was happening and they reached out to a professional, like a counselor, and they said, hey, my friend is hurting herself. So the system that was set in place by society, they were doing the right thing by calling my parents and saying, hey, we need to talk to you. Your daughter can't come back to school until this is resolved. So we're asking that you go to the nearest children's or juvenile detention center to go see a professional to see if this will work. And maybe to some other family that would have worked, but because in the family that I have, that was like, no fucking way. And let me remind you, right, my parents they don't come from money, so they're working blue collar jobs.
And it's such a good example of the system is fucked up. You said, oh, the system did what they were supposed to do. The system did what was already set up for them to do. It was not the right thing for them to do. It's a different thing for every child. And oh my gosh, that makes me filled with rage thinking of a child in extreme distress and to just have some cookie cutter, well, we'll just call the parents. Like, how fucking stupid do you have to be to not even consider the fact that maybe the parents have something to do with what's going on with the child? Yeah. And so in you choosing to share your voice now, I'm sure this is empowering for other people to hear, to be able to see that wasn't fair for Nhu. That's not what should have happened to her. And just, again, reiterating for all of us, all of these things that have happened to us, it is not because there was something wrong with you. It's because the system failed you.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, it didn't even really help because my dad, he said, what you're going to tell them is that you were doing this for attention and it doesn't mean anything and you're totally fine and you're going to go back to school and everything's going to be normal. And so that's what I had to tell them in order for my dad to be able to go to work, because our livelihood was dependent on me getting my shit together, quote unquote. And so when the counselor, I guess they did ask my dad to leave the room and it was just me and them, but I rehearsed what I was going to say and I said it, and you can tell that they were concerned, but they can't hold me without my consent or my dad's consent. They just had to let me go on my merry way. But I was still as fucked up as I was when I went in. So it really didn't do much. So if anything, it just validated the fact that I just need to hide my feelings more and not tell anybody anything. Or if I'm going to harm myself, like I'm going to have to do it a little bit more strategically. So yeah.
Really fucked up.
Yeah.
That's really fucked up. I'm sorry that happened to you. That is not how it's supposed to go. When a person needs support.
Yeah, and I laugh now because that's just how I cope, but it was a tough time. Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about mental health and the connection between mental health and societal or familial or cultural expectations. And you mentioned briefly the idea of not being enough in all these different buckets. Like, I'm not American enough, but I'm not Vietnamese enough. I'm not disabled enough, but I'm not, able-bodied enough. All these different things. I would love to hear both, if you'd like to share what it was like then and also how you're supporting yourself now. But also, yeah, like what is that like finding belonging when you don't have both feet in any of these buckets?
Yeah, so the way that I coped with it then, and I'm still coping with it now, in terms of my mental health, I didn't really know. Like, mental health was not a thing back then. Like, it was just you were depressed and fucked up, or you were normal.
And it's like, was it even depressed back then? It was like, why is she so sad all the time? She's
right.
so emo.
Emo was the thing. Like, I have like actual issues, and I don't know what to do with it. The way that I kind of addressed mental health back then, even though I didn't know that was a thing, was I sought value, or my value was defined by how others perceived me. And that's why I poured myself into art and creativity and school, because the output that I had was going to determine my value in society or my value as a human being. And so, I was obsessive with everything that I was doing. I was determined to be the best because I had nothing else going for me. So I thought. So if I could be the best in everything creative, then people will finally see me and respect me. But by doing this, while it really launched me into a really great career path, I did not have any boundaries because I was obsessed with being valued. So when I reached the medium of photography, I was like, okay, people are saying that I can do this for money. That means if I can do this for money and people are paying me for it, then I'm good enough to be something in this world. So I started my photography business at 14 years old.
Holy hell.
Yeah, don't recommend it. I mean, if that's your thing, cool, but I burnt out like for the first time when I was 15. It's not cute. But yeah, I started my business, albeit it was like I had a lot of lessons learned and I was taking advantage of a lot because I was young. But I started my business at 14 and I was obsessed with getting clients and doing what I had to do to get those clients. And then eventually, what ended up happening was I was obsessed with getting the work and the money, and I was losing myself. I wasn't doing it for the art anymore. I wasn't doing it for the sole reason why I was doing the art before, which was to amplify my voice and capture something that I couldn't articulate. Eventually, I went to college, and I was running my business in college and going to college, doing extracurriculars. It was a fucking lot. When I tell you I burnt out probably like every night, like it was just it led to my substance abuse. It led to my very very bad addiction to coffee. And when I say that, or not even coffee, just caffeine. Period. And when I say very bad, it was like I was 5 extra large iced Dunkin' Donut coffees, 2 Monsters, a Red Bull a day.
Wow.
Like, because I wasn't sleeping, because I was like, my value is in my work and how people perceive it, and that was all I had. And so and in some weird sick way it was working because it was getting me further in life, right? And so my family, my mom and dad especially, they're finally seeing after all these times telling me, you're wasting your time with art, you're wasting your time with photography, blah, blah, blah. They're finally seeing the fruit of my labor. So I just got to keep going.
Are you familiar with Gabor Mate? Do you know his work at all? In the show notes, I'll include what his actual title is. He's written a couple of books on trauma. He was a Hungarian Jew in Hungary. He talks about the trauma of not even consciously being aware of him not being wanted in the world, not being valued as a Jewish person, but talks about the connection between not feeling good enough, not feeling worthy, and workaholism, being a workaholic, because you're proving yourself over and over and over again. It's an insanely powerful compulsion to prove that you are worthy. And so he ended up becoming a doctor for a while and totally burnt himself out. And doctor is one of those like, oh, you need me because you'll die if you don't have me. Like, how interesting that he picked that career, right? And there's so many parallels between what you're sharing and his work. It's interesting because it makes sense. What you were doing makes sense. And these like coping strategies that we have, these survival patterns that we have them because it works in some way. And it's important to, as much as we can in healing these things, but also choosing to have compassion or kindness or patience with ourselves, because as fucked up as it was and how burnt out as you were, like, look at you. You figured out a way to get your parents to be like, hey, good job.
Right.
You know?
Right. So it's like, it must be working. So
right. Yeah. It's working until it's not, though, right? It's like a lot of things happen when we're really young. And I'm sure you know this, but it's essentially a child's idea of how to make myself worthy. Because logically, you know that being an artist doesn't make you worthy to be a human being on this earth, right? But it's a brilliant coping strategy in some ways.
Yeah, it's brilliant, but also it's toxic. It's so unsustainable. I mean, you're exactly right. It's like this child's mindset, but as you're going through life, you're just getting more resources, but you're still being fueled by the same mindset, the same problem that you had that started at a young age.
What did you find most beneficial in jarring yourself out of this realization? Because you had to have done something, because you're here talking to me now as that was what happened. And so what were the things that really got you to see that this isn't a you problem?
I don't think I'm alone in this, but I think COVID really was a catalyst for this realization, this epiphany, whatever you want to call it. Right when it first really started raging over the world, I was in an incredibly toxic workplace. I realized it was toxic, but I didn't really feel like I didn't have enough to go somewhere else. Like, I wasn't good enough to go somewhere else because they broke me down so much. I was working till like 1 a.m., 2 a.m. every night. I still did my photography business, so when I had any time to breathe, I was editing photos for my clients. Most of my weekends were doing weddings or photo shoots, so I didn't even have time for a social life. And then at one point, I was just like, what the fuck? I'm like, what? Like, I'm barely making enough money. I hate my job. My relationship with my boyfriend at the time, not fiance, it's on the rocks, and like, I'm always in a sour mood. I have no idea why I'm living. I'm literally just a shell of a human. So when we were forced to work from home, I started quiet quitting before quiet quitting became a thing.
Fuck yeah.
Yes, and honestly, what I did was literally just was like, what are they gonna do? Fortunately, at the time, I was in a position where they couldn't really fire me. So eventually, I was just like, you know what? My body shut down. I think it was more of a reaction more than an intentional thing that I was doing. But my body shut down. I was crying every night. I was just a mess. So eventually what happened was I realized like I need to start living for myself. And I don't know what that means right now, but I'm going to figure it out. And that time was also when a lot of social unrest was happening as well. And I think everybody was outraged, right? Myself included, but I saw myself in the Black Lives Matter movement. I saw myself in the marginalized communities that were just being oppressed and pushed down over and over and over again. And I acted on it, and I started drawing again. I was just like, I need to do something that isn't my job, and that's drawing. And it wasn't like I had this burning desire to draw. Like, I just felt like I needed to do something that wasn't what I was already doing. And eventually was able to get back in touch with my roots of why I even started art in the first place. Now I wasn't doing it to amplify my own voice, but I was doing it to amplify others. But in a way, I was still amplifying my own. I was projecting a little bit. And so that really helped heal me in a lot of ways. And it made me realize that I want to do work and live for things that are outside of myself. I want to help other people. And that's why I'm here today. I want to be able to use my story to let people know that they're not alone, which is really cliche, but there are people out there like you, like me, like yourself. It's not something that we have to navigate alone, and I want to help people realize that sooner rather than later, like I did.
Wow. That is so beautiful. I'm thinking of like little Nhu, not able to communicate with her family, not able to even like truly understand what's going on around her, and using art as a way of expression. And then fast forward a couple decades, and that same like power within you is like again doing that same thing. And it's not only benefiting you, it's not only helping you, but it's helping other people. That's really fucking awesome.
Thank you. Now in a little bit of a pickle, right? Because now, and I'm talking to my therapist about this, I'm working through it, but now am I only living for other people, right? Am I only living to serve others? Am I really serving myself? And I thought, and like, this is just an example that the journey still is ongoing. It's never over. There really is no after until you're in the ground. Now I'm trying to figure out, I thought serving others was serving myself. And in a way it is. But what do I have for myself and solely myself? And how can I now learn to be selfish and not feel guilty about it? That's something that I'm working through currently.
Yeah, thank you for your honesty there, your transparency. Because again, like we've said a few times, we aren't finished products and we never will be finished products. In sharing what you were just saying, you said something like, what am I doing? Why am I living this life? I don't know, but I'm going to figure it out. And that's so powerful for when we're in a spot that we aren't sure. And you're saying, am I living just for other people? How do I live for myself? And if you are listening to this and you're like, I've never lived for myself, I don't even know what that means.
Yeah.
I want to just lovingly remind you that you don't need to know how to be open to learning how. And so sometimes we get these like Instagram influencer mantras that are like, look in the mirror every day and say, I love everything about myself, or if you're just listening to this, you should see how hard Nhu's eyes are rolling. Because the thing is, you can say that over and over again, but if it's not true, you're just going to feel how untrue it is, right? And so if you do like using affirmations, then a little trick that I like to use is just like backing up one more step. And so if it's not, I love everything about myself, then what if it's, I'm open to learning how to love myself?
Exactly.
And if even that feels impossible, what about, I'm open to the idea that I could learn how to love myself? Just keep backing it up until you don't feel like you're going to barf saying it.
Yeah. No, that's a great tactic. That's actually something that I use. So during this volatile time in my life, I hated every part of myself, physically, mentally, internally, all of it. And eventually I went on a path of taking care of myself a little bit more. And what really helped was, I can't say I love myself in the way that I am. I love my body, because I didn't. I hated my body. What I said instead was, I respect my body. That might be a little hippie, rah, rah, whatever, but it really helps me, because I'm now kind of detaching myself from my body and saying, like, yeah, my body's been through some shit, and I respect that. And, like, it's been through the worst of times with me, and it's still here, and I respect that. So let me, because I am a people pleaser, and because I was always doing things to serve others, I was treating my body as an other. And I said, let me serve my body by taking care of it in the way that I need to respect it and say that thank you for being here with me.
I love that. Yeah, because I love my body is like so inaccessible for, I want to say, maybe 99% of people. If you don't love your body, same. Sometimes I do. Sometimes I'm like, I am really cute. But sometimes it's like, what the fuck happened to me? Acknowledging the systems that are broken. It is not you that are broken. The system is broken. If you're resonating with any part of Nhu's story, that you're not the only one. You're not the only one who has felt like they don't fully belong in all the places where maybe we're supposed to. And Nhu, are you open to sharing a little bit? Because we're hearing a lot about the struggle that you have moved through, that you were forced to move through, that you were forced to figure out how to navigate. Are you open to sharing a little bit about what's the best part of being you? And this is not from toxic positivity, but like we're hearing, like I would love to hear if someone were about to be you for a week, what would you tell them? This is the best part of your week. This is going to be something that's going to be really awesome.
They would probably need to know that I now am someone that is not afraid to speak up when it matters. At work, professionally and personally, I will say my piece, but I say it with compassion and empathy always, and kindness. And people, I think, that know me know that I am really nice and kind, but I'm also not one to be messed with. So that's something that I'm really proud of, that I can really assert myself when it counts. And people, for some reason, listen to me at work, and in my personal life, they look up to me and they take value in what I say. And that's something that I never thought I would be able to achieve. And I don't do it for accolades, glory, or whatever the word is. I do it because I care about people and people care about me. And that's something that's just so genuine and so awesome that I never want to lose sight of.
You do have this community now of people who respect you and admire you even and look up to you and care about you. And do you have any words of wisdom or insight around how do you tell when people are like safe people in building a community, coming from a path that had a lot of people that weren't that for you? What are your personal like green flags or red flags in connecting authentically with people?
Yeah, when you feel genuine compassion from someone, you'll know it in the way that they ask about how you are, how your day is. And it sounds really simple and really almost too simple, but if you feel something weird in your stomach when you're talking to someone, or like you get a little anxious when someone texts you, probably not a good sign. I genuinely only talk to people that I get excited to hear from. And when I say talk to people, I mean maintain close relationships with. There are plenty of people that I talk to every day that I'm like, I don't, whatever, like I have to talk to you. But within the past couple of years, something that I've had to observe is when someone is texting me or calling me and I get really anxious, probably someone that I need to set a boundary with. When it's someone that I'm really excited to hear from, or I feel something up here in my chest rather than my stomach, then that's probably someone that I want to keep around. And I've been very intentional in the past 5-ish years and setting boundaries and even breaking up, quote unquote, with people that I may have been friends with, but they served their purpose in that chapter of my life, but they just don't serve me now. I've had to do that to protect my space.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And pay attention to how you feel when you are connecting to those people. I'm an introvert. I feel drained after I hang out with anyone, but are you feeling like drained to your core after talking with someone? And do you dread spending time with these people? Do you feel worse about yourself after spending time with them? And that can be even, maybe that person isn't even doing anything wrong. And like you said, they're just not for this chapter in your life right now. Maybe that person is like totally awesome, but they are just reminding me of all my own insecurities. And it's like a totally internal thing for me. And it's okay to not be close with everyone all the time. And it's okay to prioritize what you need without vilifying other people every time too. Of course, there are people that you should just not hang out with because they're mean.
Right.
But it doesn't mean that you owe every good person your friendship. And I really like what you said about compassion too, because the people who I want in my life are compassionate and they care about how I feel and I care about how they feel. And sometimes when I'm friends with someone who's really different from me, maybe they're very extroverted, or maybe they're more type A than I am, or less type A, or whatever, it's interesting to see what happens when I bring up a preference with them, or I make a request of them to say, I really like spending time with you, and I'm not available to hang out every night, or I'm not available to go out after 9 p.m., and to notice the reaction in that person. Do they respect and have compassion for you and your preferences, or the way you like to be supported? I've talked on the show before about how when I'm upset, I am not someone that wants to be touched or hugged when I'm upset, right? That doesn't actually feel supportive to me. That feels overstimulating for me and my body. And so sharing that information with people who care about me, the people who truly care about how I feel, will respect that, instead of then putting their own ideas onto what support or comfort looks like.
Yeah, that's a great point. And that's something that I've used as a gauge as well. Is when I set that boundary, or when I set that precedent of how I prefer to go about a situation, or how I prefer to be talked to, or what my preferences are in a relationship, if they are on the defense and they're like, why? And then they immediately take personal offense to it, probably not someone that you want to maintain a close relationship with. Maybe you can still be friends with them if you want that, but that's something immediately in my head that's like, okay, you're now 1 to 2 rings outside of my inner circle, and that's where you're going to stay for now.
Yes.
So.
Yeah. There's all these sayings about the people who get upset about you setting a boundary are the people who are benefiting from you not having one.
Yeah.
And so when a friend says, this is what I need to maintain a deep relationship with you, the people that get mad about that are the people you actually needed to set that boundary with in the first place, and they just fucking proved it, right?
Yep, 100%, yeah. And then also on the flip side too, which is something I had to learn, it's okay for people to do that to you, and people will go about that differently. Like they may just completely ghost you, even though you've been friends for however many years, and that's something that I had to learn to not take personally as well. And as a compassionate person, understand that they're going through their own journey and their own internal thing, and I need to respect that in however way they need to process. And if it's meant to be that we come together again at some point, cool. If not, then it was really great while it lasted. But
yeah, again, not defining our self-worth externally, and we can do that in friendship relationships too. So if you're listening and this is resonating with you, how can we build this level of support for ourselves by ourselves? You were talking about how you are no longer in like the before phase, but you're in more of a during to after. How do we get into that during on our own? What kind of things do you suggest to start this process by?
Yeah, first and foremost, really being intentional about setting space for yourself, however that looks or whatever that means to you. For me, it really meant just pausing on everything and taking inventory of what I had in my life. And that meant people, and that meant stopping and almost saying, this is who I am, this is my job, this is how I feel. Because I was just so busy going through life every day that I was just, again, a shell, right? I wasn't really feeling anything. I wasn't really taking anything into account. So I wanted to set that space to really take that inventory and ground myself as a human and as a person, just knowing who I had around me, who I am, what do I even like. Like at the time, again, I was eating everything in sight because I could, but I didn't really take into account, like, do I like fried fish on a Tuesday morning, or do I like maybe like an oatmeal bar or something? Those are things I was not even thinking about. And that sounds sort of simple, but that was a necessary step to take. And then from there, in the vein of taking inventory of things in my life, it was also taking inventory of the relationships that I had. And some people prefer to maybe do this internally and mentally. I literally did a spreadsheet because
Of course you did. Because why wouldn't you do a spreadsheet?
And I mean, maybe on paper it sounds like rude to rank your friends and your family, but that's what I had to do to really understand, okay, here's where these are the people that I want to maintain relationships with. Here are the people that are fine, that are in like the middle ground, that are like, I can talk to you every now and then, but I'm not going to go out of my life for. And then here are the people that they're there and I'll be cordial and whatever, but they're not serving me in the way that I need to. And from there, diving even deeper and understanding what about those genuine close relationships is working for me? What are the traits in those people? What are those traits in those people that I really value the most? And why do I value those? It's really just almost, again, taking inventory and really understanding at a very base value level of why and who and like all the W's, like who, what, where, why. And that's just really helpful to ground myself and my space that I'm taking up and the space that the people around me are taking up. And now knowing that, I can be more intentional moving forward about the new relationships that I make or the new people that I meet and picking up on the green flags and the red flags and understanding that we don't need to be best friends right away. Like it's not kindergarten. Like we're not at recess and we're not sharing a swing and we're best friends. Like these things take time and that's okay. Yeah. So really just leading with a lot of intention and grounding is my way of doing it.
Yeah, I really like that because it aligns with like the data collection phase I talk about with like when you're not enjoying where you're at. Often when we aren't enjoying our lives or we aren't enjoying our relationships, we often feel this like, well, I don't know. I have no idea what I like. And you were talking about defining yourself so much by your work that when you take work out of it, like who the hell am I? And I really like this idea of doing it with your friends even and just writing out, what do I like about this person? And just like sparking within you the things that you like and figuring out who you are in relation to that too. There's a speaker named Kyle Cease who has this exercise that's really similar, writing out every single thing that you do or the stuff that you normally do in a day, and then rating that from 1 to 10 on some scale. So maybe that's the energy it takes you. Maybe it's your level of enjoyment. Maybe 10 is like the best fucking thing you could be doing. And it's like that you would just do that every day if you could. It's just the best. 1 is I fucking hate this. I want to like never see this thing again.
Never
right?
again. Yep.
Never again. And so actually going through and like creating a number for each of those things, then seeing what like the score is, right? So adding them all up, seeing what the score is, seeing what the average is per task, and then going in and noticing that getting rid of a couple ones can make a huge difference in our lives because it raises the average by a whole lot. You don't have to get rid of a ton of ones. You'd have to get rid of a lot of like 5s or 6s. But even just having that same idea with, I like that you're adding it into relationships. Who are the people that actually drain me so much that I don't even want to go out? And how can I like increase the average of my experience, my enjoyment of relationships or of tasks or of the work that I'm doing or whatever it is? And I like thinking of it in this data collection phase because it allows us to just take in information and not take it so seriously. And it's not all on me. I need to figure it out. It's just looking at what's in front of you. And oftentimes the information is just clear at that point.
And I will say for the listeners that are not super into numbers and like charts, there's another tactic that I do with my partner especially, but you can do this on your own. It's just a little bit more high level and it's taking inventory of your day in general, similar to what you just mentioned, but I always ask myself, what am I grateful for today? Or what am I proud of that I accomplished? Even if it's the smallest thing. Like it could be like, I put away the jar of peanuts that I put away, or I meant to put away last week. Like it could be as small as that. What are you looking forward to this week? And what's something that you learned this week?
We can even add on maybe asking ourselves, where did I need more support last week? Like, where did I need more support? And how could I receive support going forward? You might actually need to be even more intentional with this and more proactive in reaching out to people that maybe don't live in your house with you.
It's just start with the person that it doesn't even have to be community. It doesn't even have to be more than 2 people. It can just be one person even. But I would recommend more than one person because you don't want to become codependent. But just I think looking back at that list of people or that chart or whatever, however you want to organize your relationships and identifying the specific people, like maybe you have one friend or cousin or coworker that's really good at talking to you about relationships. Maybe you have another friend that is really good about talking, that you feel comfortable talking about like health problems with. It feels more like you're not trauma dumping on them. You're talking about something that you normally talk about with them, and it should feel organic. I mean, we're saying all this as very almost prescriptive tactics, but it should feel organic. It should feel genuine, and it really goes back to how you feel, like physically, right? Again, if that person gives you a warm, fuzzy feeling, or you feel like you can just like relax your muscles a little bit, even if a little. If you're facing someone that you feel yourself tensing up a little bit, or even like you're holding your breath a little more, or, like really paying attention to your body is super important in terms of, again, building that inventory of relationships, but also building that community for yourself as well.
Yeah, I like the idea of not needing a single person to be able or available to support you in all these different aspects of your life. I've said in previous episodes the importance of remembering, like, you don't owe your trauma story, you don't know the details of your life in order to get support from people. You can always just stay centered in your feelings. I'm feeling disappointed, I'm feeling confused, or I'm feeling lost. And you don't need to go into really painful memories that often can be re-traumatizing if you haven't had space to heal through them. And something I've found really helpful in my own life too is asking or letting the person know if you are wanting just to vent or if you're wanting advice, and if they have the space to talk about it, right? If I called you Nhu and was just, you answer the phone and I was like, oh my gosh, Ethan, blah, 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 blah. And I have no idea what's going on with you. I don't know what your capacity is. And just creating some opportunities with people to say, hey, I'm having a really hard day. Do you have time? Is now a good time to talk about that? Do you have space to talk about that right now? And just getting their buy-in too, because then maybe if you are someone that struggles with feeling like I'm a burden, it can help alleviate those worries within us too.
Yeah, totally. And I also want to mention too, because not everyone has already a group of people, right? How do you build that group of people? And I want to be inclusive and mindful of that. For me, starting completely with no friends at all, I really leaned into the things that I cared about or that I found joy in or things that excited me. And in those spaces, will you also find like-minded people that will also excite you. So for me, that was art, that was creativity, that was trying new things that I never tried before, and allowing myself to be open to these relationships. One thing that I wish I kept in mind, because I was, again, so eager to please and so like needing of validation, was I didn't set those boundaries for myself. So again, going back to that inventory of yourself, like what do you value, what do you need, and then going out and about into the world and finding things that you enjoy and finding those people that enjoy it as well. Understanding and setting those boundaries, whatever they may be for you, whether that's I don't want to text a whole lot right away, or like I'm not comfortable sharing personal things right away, like whatever that is, stand by it, because then the right people will respect it. And that's when you know that that's a good person to keep in your circle.
Yeah. Thank you for saying that.
Yeah.
And so we've talked about a lot of things that are really shitty today, to put it lightly. And you've mentioned that you've had to move through navigating self-harm and substance abuse and should I even be here thoughts. And while we are talking about the importance of creating space to support yourself on your own or creating space to support yourself through community, I just want to really explicitly say that if you are ever in a state where you feel worried about your own safety in any capacity, where you feel like thinking about these things is too much, you could trust yourself to know that this isn't something that I should be doing on my own. And if you have the resources to seek out medical support or professional support with a therapist or a psychiatrist, that's awesome. If you don't have the means to be able to do that, I'm going to include some numbers and resources in the show notes for a few different things that might be supportive for you. But please know that you matter and you are not meant to be hurt or harmed or disregarded or not listened to. And just because the system is failing you doesn't mean that you shouldn't be here or you are wrong the way that you are. It is only ever a sign that the system has failed.
Yeah. Yeah. And don't let the system or others determine your value.
On that note, what's a message that you have for someone who's listening that maybe has really resonated with part or all of your story and the things that you've shared, if you could just like reach out to that listener right now and send them a little message, what would you say?
I would say, and we've probably all heard of the trope of talk to yourself as if you were a young child. So I'm going to frame it this way. Don't feel like you have to follow a predetermined path, and it's okay to feel lost. You're supposed to feel lost. That's normal, but just be patient with yourself and know that there's something within you that can guide you to the place that you're meant to be. And it's okay to not know what that is, but just trust yourself, listen to yourself, and the rest will fall into place where they should be.
Yeah, thank you. And so, saving this for last, but for all the listeners, I know Nhu because she is the beautiful artist that designed the graphic for the podcast. And it was so meant to be to work together. And I am so happy with how that came out. And do you have a little bit of a snapshot or a little insight into why the Unforgetting graphic is a chocolate bar beyond the fact that I fucking love chocolate? But this idea of unforgetting the truth of who we are in systems that benefit from us forgetting and remembering that it's not that we needed to learn new information. We need to unlearn bad information. Like, we are worthy. You are good enough. And it's not supposed to feel this fucking bad all the time, trying to get back to that place. So I'd love to hear a little bit about how you landed on that.
Yeah. So it's funny because when we had our initial conversation, this is not the direction at all. We didn't even talk about candy, not even one bit. So the initial direction that we were heading in, something for me just felt, it didn't feel enough because there's so much like richness that this podcast like serves and gives. And I think when I sat back, I was like, life can be sweet. Like, life can be pretty damn good sometimes. And I think in that moment, I'm like, wait, okay, hold on, there's something here. And maybe, like, Forrest Gump had a little bit to do with this. Like, life is like a box of chocolates, yada yada. But the idea of the candy bar, like the chocolate bar, peeling back the wrapper and realizing, there's something there that's worth looking at. And it could really end up being a lot richer and a lot better than you thought it would be. And chocolate in itself is so rich, strong, and powerful, and all the reasons that we love chocolate. And I just thought it was a good metaphor for the podcast. So.
Yes. Yeah. I was so excited when I opened that email because we had been talking about that other angle and I liked it. But when you showed me that, I was like, oh my God, this is why this girl is here for me right now. This is why I knew like we were supposed to be together, because it was so unique and so relevant at the same time. And it's also like, to me, a little bit of like a fuck you to the system in this like wellness space, right? And like, I am not supposed to enjoy a full chocolate bar, right? But that when we are healing, there of course are things that will be difficult to navigate and difficult to move through. But it's not supposed to be fucking hard all the time. It's supposed to be enjoyable, and it's good to feel pleasure, and it's good to enjoy. And that is our natural state. It's not that we need to learn a new concept. We need to unlearn and just return back to like, you were worthy the whole time. It's not that you became this artist that you discovered your worthiness through. It's you enjoyed art and then you returned back to the truth of who you are. You returned back to the fact that you were worthy without it.
Yeah. And if I can end on this note, I actually have a tattoo that says "Art is the answer." It's my first tattoo, and because for a long time I was telling myself ending it is the answer, but it's not. For me, art is the answer, and that's how I found myself again, or I'm still trying to find myself again through art. So.
Well, I am very glad that you are here, Nhu, and you have left your mark on this podcast and on the world. So, for the listeners that want to follow along with the things that you're doing, or maybe even want to hire you to do some badass art for them too, how do we follow along with you?
Yeah, so you can follow me on Instagram at brand new NHU creative, or you can go to my website at brandnewNHU.com. On the side, I do brand consulting, illustration, and really try to help those that need it. So those that are supporting causes for voices that need to be heard or communities that are marginalized, I'm here for it. And people like you, Hannah, who are here to amplify stories that need to be heard. But these are the kind of people that I want to work with. So if that sounds like you, please hit me
Thank you. Yeah, you won't regret it. I can say that
up.
for sure. Thank you, New, for being here. This has been such an expansive conversation. Thank you for choosing to share some of your story. And thank you for sticking around.
Yeah, thank you for the safe space.